technology-driven pediatric research in drug discovery and early pediatric medicines development phases by providing expertise, facilities, and methodologies focused on basic research for pediatric medicine discovery. Its mission is based on recognizing the importance of growth and ontogeny characteristics in pediatric drug device response and the integration of preclinical and clinical research. This 7th webinar is organized within a one-year educational program set up by EPTRI Paediatric Medical Devices Platform. During this webinar, we will delve into the challenges and opportunities for development and application of different technologies and medical devices to the neonatal population. Let me introduce our speakers, starting with Dawn Sharkey. Dawn is an academic neonatologist with a broad research portfolio keen on cross-discipline collaboration. His research focuses on the development and integration of healthcare technologies for neonatal care, particularly medical device development in the fields of neonatal resuscitation, neonatal transport, neonatal monitoring and diagnostic, and artificial intelligence. His goals are to enhance delivery of neonatal care to improve key outcomes, including brain injury and bronchopulmonary dysplasia. Dawn will talk about the development of technology specifically for newborn infants. He will highlight some of the barriers to development, use technologies in the delivery room as an example of lack of development and the risk of trying to use adult development devices before giving some examples of future technologies developed for this unique setting and patient population. The second speaker of the webinar is Catherine Birdsall. He's an associate professor in the academic department of Paediatric University of Cambridge and honorary consultant neonatologist at the University of Cambridge Addenbrooke's Hospital. Her research focuses in the areas of glucose monitoring and management, innovative methods of vital sign monitoring, both aiming for a better understanding of neonatal physiology, as well as designing medtech that address the specific clinical needs of newborn. She was the first to show the potential of continuous glucose monitoring in the preterm infant, leading to the several international trials using CGM and the increasing use of CGM in the newborn. Catherine will talk about the challenges and opportunities of medtech use and development in NICU, highlighting work she and her research group have done using continuous glucose monitors and new projects exploring innovative monitoring strategies. Our last speaker is Giuseppe Andreoni. Giuseppe is a full professor at the Department of Design of the Politecnico di Milano, where he is the director of the Laboratory Technology and Design for Healthcare and professor at the School of Design. The research activity conducted at the Politecnico di Milano mainly consists of the design of products, systems, environments, and services for the health and well-being of people using co-design and user-centered design methods combined with ergonomics. This allows the synergy between design and technology that are combined in innovative solutions for the technological point of view of high affordance for the user and of considerable impact for the systems where they are implemented. The main applications are health and medical devices, both for monitoring as assistive technologies for disability, sports and fitness, home automation with advanced solutions. Giuseppe will describe the main typologies of wearables, the available solutions, and his experience with smart garments in monitoring newborns. Following the presentations, there will be time for a short question and answer session with the speakers to answer your questions. Dawn, if you're ready, please, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you to EPTRI for inviting me today. And I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see my first slide. Is that okay? Great. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar from a very sunny UK, where we're having a bit of a mini heat wave at the moment, which is lovely. So I'm going to talk about neonatal technology development, and what I want to do, because it's quite a broad area, I wanted just to focus in on the delivery room, which is one of my areas of interest, and talk about some of the difficulties, some of the challenges we have there, and how the groups I'm working with and industry are trying to address those. So before we start, these are some of my declarations and conflicts of interest. So I sit as the early life theme lead for the NHR. What was the Children and Young People's MedTech is now called the HRC Paediatrics and Child Health in the UK. I'm the research lead for the UK Neonatal Transport Group. I'm also a clinical director and a shareholder at a company called Pulse Medical, who I'll talk about because I work very closely with them. And I hold a number of patents with them around newborn monitoring. And I work with a number of industry partners, but none of those additional partners have had any influence in today's talk. So this is an outline of what I'm just going to try and go through in the next 15 to 20 minutes. I'm going to talk about some of the barriers, and talk about technology readiness level, which is quite important when it comes to developing technologies. And then I'm going to move into the delivery room and talk about the current state of play, and then give some specific examples of technology development that are going on at the moment before I sum up. And there may well be some overlap with the other speakers today, which should hopefully give us some nice time for questions and answers at the end. So this was a paper that was published last year. I've just taken out some extracts from it. This was by Shah and colleagues, and they wanted to review what the barriers were to pediatric device development. And these were kind of the four main areas that they highlighted, that the population that we serve is much smaller than the adult population, and tends to be much more healthy. And so there's less of an appeal to develop technologies in that population. Our disease states are also more limited than we see in the adult population. They felt that clinical trial enrollment was going to be challenging, particularly when you're testing new devices. And it's something I particularly have never found particularly challenging. I think parents are always open to new medical devices being developed. It was something that came back from their feedback. Parental consent to participate in these trials as well was also thought to be quite cumbersome, quite long-winded, and difficult. And then there were concerns around liability. Where does the liability lie if something goes wrong within a clinical trial when you're testing a new medical device? I've added an initial bit here, really, and I think there is a lack of translational researchers in this space, and I think there are reasons for that, and I think it's something that we, as working in this area, this domain, as paediatricians, as academic researchers, need to address. One of them is around academic recognition. If you're a clinical academic, the glory of big clinical trials and changing practice are out there. But actually, if you're in device development, it can take somewhere between 5 and 15 years to develop your device, first patient trials, before you actually get it out there into the clinic and can be used by anybody. There are also funding challenges where we have this stop-start funding, where you go from your early proof of concept trials through to first patient trials and into big clinical trials. And that produces these gaps in between the times that really prolong the course, the journey of developing a new medical device. Shah and colleagues, they undertook some surveys looking at what the challenges were in the early stages and the late stages of pediatric device development. And these were where people found the biggest challenges. So when it came to early stage barriers, there was a lot around regulatory testing, clinical validation, early prototype developments, and much of this was down to governance. There's a lot of documentation, all of the material testing that needs to undergo, and an institutional and ethical board approvals. Now, many of these things you will come across in any particular clinical study you do, but some of them are more burdensome in medical device development, particularly when it comes to getting your device through the regulatory hurdles. the late stage, once you've got through that and you've got what you think is a good medical device, there are all sorts of challenges, and here you can see it's getting those regulatory approvals, whether that's the FDA or other approaches. When it comes to commercializing something, that becomes quite challenging, and concerns around investment and dilution of investments, the business model, how that's going to stack up. And then one of these ones at the bottom, which is always an interesting point in any device development, is filing disclosures, and who within the institution, within the inventorship group, will go on that. So lots of reasons listed. And I normally, when I give a talk similar to this, I always put this slide up. So I won't be able to see hands today, but what I wanted to do was just to give you an opportunity just to think through this. And I've raised a question here. There's going to be three questions. And the first one is, have you used a CE or FDA approved device that's not been studied in infants and children? And I think if you have a think, for those of you who are clinicians, are there any devices that you're using today that you understand definitely haven't been studied in infants and children, but you use them in your daily practice? And have you used any devices, medical devices in newborns in particular, or even in children, that are off license? So it may have one indication, but you've used it for another indication. And so very much like the medicines we use, is it off license? And again, I suspect many people would raise their hands to that. And then this final bit, I've got no idea if the devices I've used have been studied in neonates prior to regulatory approval. And I think for most of us, this is probably the one that most of us would raise our hands to, because many of the background information, we have very little information as to, prior to regulatory approval, had this been studied in the population that it's been licensed for. And what I want to do is just to highlight some of those elements to you. So this was a study I always cite. It was published in Paediatrics about 10 years ago now, and there have been subsequent very similar studies published that have shown the same thing. And these were class 3 medical devices approved for children. So these are at the higher end of risk. They're often implantable devices, and they've been given either pre-marketing or humanitarian exemption path, or approved based on the background for the evidence, the clinical evidence that had been submitted by those seeking approvals. And they found that there were 25 devices that had gone through the FDA approvals process between 2008 and 2011 that fell into this category. And of those, 21 of the 25 had not been studied in a single pediatric patient. So no one under the age of 18 had been involved in any of the pre-regulatory studies, and yet they'd all been given marketing and licenses to be used in children under the age of 18. 3 of those studies had mandated post-marketing surveillance, which is quite a common approach by the FDA to look at enrollment of pediatric patients. So it's quite shocking when you think 84% of these devices, which are high risk, had never been studied in pediatric patients, and yet were given a license to be used in that population. Most of these devices that were in that particular study, and most of the devices that we use today, have been adapted from adult devices, and rarely have they been designed for the unique needs of the neonatal population, let alone the pediatric population. So when we think about it, why is this? And it's possibly because neonates is a very niche specialty. We deal with a relatively proportionally small population compared to many other areas of medicine. We have the challenges of both disease, anatomy, physiology. Placing devices on babies who weigh 500 grams can be challenging in itself. And that brings about all sorts of different elements into why there might be barriers to developing these technologies. It's felt the commercial gains are small, and that's probably true because it is a small population, but actually the health gains can be more significant than many other areas of medicine, and that needs to be something that we need to get over. And there is an argument almost for orphan recognition of some of the devices we develop, in the same way that we do for rare diseases and new drugs that are being developed, because our population is very unique and has unique needs, that perhaps are outside the realms of current commercial companies to invest significantly in. I talked about the technology readiness level or the TRL, and this is quite an important concept to get a grip of when developing technologies. So this is the TRL steps that we see, which go from a description from a level 1 kind of blue sky idea right the way up to level 9, where this is something that is actually in use day in, day out, improving the healthcare that we deliver. And between those, there's lots of different steps, and you move from the left to the right. You go from this sort of fundamental discovery science through to the innovation, and then finally you hit the last 2 stages of commercialization. And traditionally, academia, the research has covered the first 5 steps in this innovation pipeline, with commercial companies really coming in at about stage 7. When you have a prototype, you've got patient clinical evidence that it's going to be useful, and then it's commercializing that. And then this particular process, very much like developing new medicines or vaccines, could take a long time, although perhaps it's probably longer, taking typically anywhere from 10 to 15 years to get a device from that idea right the way out into the clinical path where it's used on a daily basis. And what I wanted to show that those actually the distance between academia and commercial reality is quite a big gap, and I would argue that academic research is right down at TRL 1 to 3, and the commercial is right at the end in 8 and 9. So that leaves us with a big gap in the middle, and that's where I'm saying people like me, who are technology-focused researchers, the translationists, really come into our own, where we take that blue sky thinking. So I work with lots of scientists, computer scientists, engineers, material scientists, mathematicians, and we take that great idea, that great science, we apply it to a particular clinical problem, a challenge that we have in our population, and then hopefully at some point we exit the pipeline where it goes into a commercial company who can make this happen on a big scale so that every potential patient can benefit from that. And for those of you who are interested, I've just put up one slide here. This is a summary. This is a diagram that was taken from this paper here that we published last year with 2 of my clinical fellows. It just talks about the TRL pathway and gives you some idea about the steps involved. And what we do is we pull out some of the kind of key neonatal technologies that have got an evidence base and are now out there improving the health of newborn babies. So please feel free to go away and have a look at that paper. It's open access, so anyone can read it. So what I wanted to do was then just bring back on the second half of the talk a focus on the delivery room. And here I've got an obstetric theatre, and this is a real obstetric theatre in the US. It all looks super fantastic, bright and shiny. And what I want to do was to say that most of what you see in this picture is geared towards looking after mum. So most of the technology that we see in this delivery room is there to look after mum, to monitor mum, to care for mum, to support her during the operation if she has a C-section, for example. And actually what we're left with as paediatrician and neonatologists is this little bit of kit on the far right, which is our resuscitator, which you don't need me to tell you is quite basic, quite rudimentary, hasn't changed in 50 or 60 years dramatically. Although there are new innovative ideas coming through for resuscitators, it still remains as basically something that can provide heat, can provide gases, and as a bed to perform any stabilization or resuscitation that you need to do. But that's where we are at the moment in neonatology. There's very little else that goes on in the delivery room from a technological point of view. And we summarise this again. This was a paper we published a couple of years ago, and again, it's open access, so feel free to go and read it. And we summarised all of the changes that have happened in the delivery room, newborn life support, resuscitation guidance over the last sort of 5 iterations from 2000 to 2020, because they're done on a 5-yearly basis. And what we've done is highlighted all of the technologies and when they came in. And I think you'll agree that there really aren't that many technologies that have evolved in the delivery room over these 20-odd years. There's a new iteration due to come in next year, and I suspect it will remain fairly similar. I've highlighted here the ones that the devices that were out there. Plastic bags, you could argue, is a very basic device. costs very little and actually can have a significant effect on the outcome of the baby. And then really all we're left with are the pulse oximeter and the ECG. And you don't need me to tell you, the ECG has been around for 130 years and the pulse oximeter for nearly 60 years. And that's all we really got in the delivery room to guide our care that we deliver. And there are some flaws in some of these technologies. So as you know, the pulse oximeter was developed for adults and has transitioned into babies by simply making smaller sensors. But there are all sorts of issues with that. So for example, our babies have got fetal hemoglobin, which has got a different oxygen dissociation curve to adult hemoglobin. And yet, if you want to put a new pulse oximeter on the market today, you have to undertake a desaturation study in no fewer than 8 healthy adults, and you desaturate them down to 70%. And then you're required to capture an undefined number of infant oxygen blood samples where you compare it up with a predicate device, a current pulse oximeter out there. So very little information goes into developing these for babies. It's all geared around the adult again. And this was a study done by Arjen de Pas's group in the Netherlands, which showed really nicely in the delivery room, when you put on an ECG and compare it to a pulse oximeter to measure heart rate from birth, you can see in the first sort of 60 seconds to 180 seconds, so the first 1 to 3 minutes of life, how the pulse oximeter massively underestimates the heart rate for the baby compared to ECG. And that's down to all the perfusion issues. So here we have a population that is transitioning from being a fetus to a newborn, and the technology really isn't designed to cope with that. It's designed for an adult, but it's not designed for this period of transition where your saturations and your perfusion are particularly low in those first few minutes of life. And it carries on for about 7 minutes, where statistically underestimates the heart rate. And for those of you involved in neonatology, that's quite important, because we often change our resuscitation pathway based on a heart rate when it's less than 100. And you can see for that first 3 minutes of life, when you're really making the big decisions about what interventions the baby needs, many of the heart rate variables from the pulse oximeter will be in that area where you will think about more intensive resuscitation practice. And if we look at the SpO2, so the oxygen saturations in these babies, these again in the first 10 minutes of life, these are drawn from about 400 babies in all, a few of them preterm. And these are the centile charts of where your oxygen saturations lie in those first 10 minutes of transition in babies who did not require any intervention. So these are, in theory, healthy babies. And you can see this wide variation in the first sort of 5 minutes of life. And you remember, anything below 70% is unreliable in a pulse oximeter. So it's not really until we get to probably up to about 4 or 5 minutes of life do we actually get any useful data back from the pulse oximeter. And then there's quite a wide range. And of course, these algorithms are all built on adult desaturation studies and not on newborn babies. And what's important, I think, when you look at these, these studies, as I said, were produced from over nearly 500 infants. So they put a pulse oximeter on from birth and the first 10 minutes of life. But if you calculate the missing data, there is about 70% of the data was missing because the devices were unreliable, there was a poor signal or poor perfusion. So we only get about 30%. So the pulse oximeter in this setting isn't great. There are other technologies that we use. So whether it's a resuscitator or we try and use other things like humidified gases, but it's remained very simple. So we use the pulse oximeter, and particularly if you're in North America, they often use ECG for heart rate. But there's very little has evolved. The resuscitators we're using are starting to come to their own. So these were the 2 examples of resuscitators that were developed to support delayed cord clamping. So a great innovation that saves babies' lives and saves babies' brains. And if you do it in the right way, you can prolong the clamping of the cord, then actually you can improve the outcome for the baby. So these were resuscitators that were developed to allow that, facilitate that a bit better. But again, there's nothing great and wonderful in them other than that they're a clever idea in how that you can have a platform that allows you to delay the cord clamping and still carry on with your stabilization of the baby. One thing that
less than 1 minute, sorry.
One device that really has helped has been NIRS, which was developed in babies, but actually all of the studies that have been done in the delivery room or in the NICU have really not shown any difference in outcomes when using these devices, so they're not particularly useful. We've asked clinicians what they really want to use in the delivery room, and we came up with this. This is a heat map showing all the things that they want. So whether it's video analysis, how you ventilate the lung, monitor vital signs, are all top of that list. So with SurePulse, we've been developing these technologies, and this was the first device that I developed with them, which was a heart rate monitor built into an neonatal cap that we put on the babies when they're born. And this was our first iteration, but we wanted to take things further. And we looked at what clinicians really wanted, and these were the sort of top variables that they wanted to measure in the delivery room in a more accurate and reliable way. And so what we've done is we've done some early studies. This is one, hoping that the video will work. So this is applying a patch, which allows you to put all your ECG electrodes on, and it sticks to the baby. And we undertook these studies in over 70 babies who needed resuscitation. The patch goes on in about 8 seconds, and you've got your QRS signal within about 8 seconds later, and it works. And none of the electrodes fell off, which is very uncommon in this setting. So we've taken that, and this is Saeed Taha, who's one of my clinical fellows, who's developing what we call the next generation neonatal monitor for this setting. And what it is really is this system. I've put up a rendering of it. And basically it's that patch, but it's a wireless patch that has ECG. It's got 3 pulse oximeters built into it and temperature sensing. So you can use the best pulse oximeter signal to give you the information that you need. And we're starting our very first patient trial at the end of this month, which is very exciting. And there again is just another rendition of it from a different angle. And it works really well with babies going into plastic bags for high-risk babies. And it uses no adhesive. It just sticks to the skin because it uses the wet properties of the skin. And so it just comes off when you arrive on the neonatal unit. We've adapted that as well, and we've got this device which has had its first patient trials now, and is a wireless kangaroo care system that's reusable. The parents can strap it around the baby and then walk freely around. And here again, we've got some examples of that on both a mum and on a neonatal nurse. So these are really exciting times. We're trying to change things in the neonatal unit, and these will allow us to then integrate more AI, video analysis, clinical decision support tools, and allow us to take those next steps in neonatal technologies. So I think I've probably shown you that we do have a very small population. It's difficult getting babies into these trials, but once we get going, they do work, and we can navigate through this maze with potentially huge benefits for our population. In an ideal world, I think we'd have more funding to avoid those valleys of death, as we call it, where a clever piece of science ends up staying on the researcher's shelf and never translates into the clinic. We have more industry engagement and resource from them to support the work that we do, a smoother regulatory path, and the importance about designing for our population that has unique needs in a unique environment is crucial. We can't just adapt things from adult practice. So I'll end there, and hopefully maybe a minute or so over, but we've got time for questions at the end. This is a beautiful campus I work at in Nottingham, the University of Nottingham, and the Centre for Perinatal Research. You can see at the top there is my hospital, which is nicely linked to my university. So where I care for my babies, I can walk across the road and speak to scientists, engineers, to develop the technologies. If any of you are in the UK, please do pop in and see us. I'm more than welcome to show you around. Thank you.
Thank you, Don, for your presentation. And it's time for the second speaker. So Catherine, you can start. We can't hear you.
Thanks. Okay, let's see if I can share the screen. Can you see my screen?
Not in the full screen.
Ah,
Not in presentation mode, so maybe you...
Slideshow. Better?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Let me put that out of the way. Okay, all right. Thank you for inviting me to talk today as well, and the opportunity to share with you what I think are the opportunities and challenges of medtech in neonatal intensive care. And I think I'll iterate a lot of the same sort of themes that Don has raised on a slightly more personal level. So as neonatologists, we spend a lot of time, as Don has said, interacting with medical technology, and the babies we care for are really dependent on a wide range of medical technologies to keep them alive. However, as med technology evolves very rapidly, I think it's really important that we make as much effort as we can as neonatologists to make sure our babies benefit, because they deserve to benefit from these advances in technology as much as adults, even as Don said, as that can be quite challenging. So I think the medtech opportunities lie for me as a clinician in terms of allowing us not just to improve the way we deliver our current clinical care, but also helping us understand the physiology and the pathophysiology of the babies that we care for. Because I think this allows us to individualize the care we give and allows us to provide a more personalized approach to the care, which links into the real drivers at the moment to deliver precision medicine, to optimize our benefits to patients of interventions whilst reducing the risks to the individuals. Moreover, in the setting of NICU and in the newborn, we're not just addressing the critical immediate medical challenges for those babies, but it's important that we address the longer term health consequences of interventions, because it's the critical developmental time for our babies. And babies are not just small adults for whom technology can be made smaller, version of an adult bit of kit. It's really important we seek to address the specific needs of the babies we care for and don't just rely on sort of hand-me-down technology from the adult world. But as Don said, developing tech is very costly in terms of both time and money. And many commercial companies perceive a real challenge in working in this space because they see it as high risk. They don't think patients and families will consent, although I would disagree with that. They think that it's risky to have an intervention that may go wrong in a baby and the whole future ahead of them. And they see it, as Don has described, as a small market where the risk and benefit do not weigh out. But I think increasingly with opportunities with looking at orphan identifying them as orphan products, that potentially increases our market for these babies. So what I wanted to do is to share with you work we've been doing in two areas. First, looking at glucose monitoring, which has the potential both to reduce the need for aversive heel pricks for our babies, so it has an acute benefit, but also because it's important as glucose monitoring provides us an opportunity for a robust understanding of the physiology and pathology of glucose control to then support clinical decision making. And I'll talk about how we've used continuous glucose monitoring in this area, a new piece of kit and a new piece of technology. Secondly, focusing on designing for the specific needs of the newborn, I want to look at vital sign monitoring that addresses the very specific need of babies in intensive care, where they benefit from both less aversive contact, but also more positive human touch that impacts not just on their short-term physiology and their short-term stability, but on their long-term health, as well as the health of their parents. So first, looking at glucose monitoring. So most of you will be well aware of the dramatic developments in technology for glucose monitoring over the last 50 years. The first point of care glucose meters became available in the 1970s, but they've evolved very much in the last few years into continuous glucose monitors that are now available very widely, and people are using them to assess not ill health, but actually good health. And there's a lot of worried well who are using Zoe health apps to monitor their own metabolic health. In the health area, CGM are now recommended by NICE for use in all diabetic patients, and that's adults and children at risk of hypoglycemia. Yet they're not licensed for use in the newborn, despite many newborns being at significant risk of both hypo and hyperglycemia. And the reason for this is that for licensing to occur, it requires to be clinical trials to demonstrate efficacy and safety. And as we've heard, commercial companies shy away from undertaking such studies in a high-risk neonatal units. They're expensive, and often they then rely on us as clinicians using such devices off regulation or off license. So when the CGMs first became available to adults some years ago now, we started using CGMs in the neonatal unit to explore glucose control and look at physiology and to see how they might benefit our babies, because we knew that they were at significant risk. So all these studies have been done using off-license devices. Here on the right, for those of you who are not familiar with what a continuous glucose monitor looks like, you've got a very small sensor which lies subcutaneously. It's inserted with a small needle that you can't see here, but the needle is then removed, and this sensor is really fine. You can hardly feel it with your fingers. The sensors have a transmitter that clicks onto the back here, and those transmitters wirelessly connect. Now this was a wired system, an older system. Now the transmitter connects here, but wirelessly connects to a receiver, which will give you data to be able to read and use in real time. What you've got on the left here is the data that we collected using masked CGM. So the clinicians were not aware of what the data was we were collecting. This is in a preterm baby weighing approximately 1 kilo during the first week of their life on our neonatal unit. And the clinicians at this time were aiming to target glucose control between 2.6 and 10. But what you can see is there are significant periods when this baby did not have glucose levels between 2.6 and 10. What it represents, I should say, is this is, let me go back. What it represents is from midnight to midnight across the x-axis. On the y-axis, you have glucose control. Here it's in millimoles per litre, so 0 to 20. Each separate coloured line depends on that sometimes the glucose level. So sometimes the glucose levels are here in yellow, above 10 millimoles per litre, but sometimes they're much lower. And you've got a period here where your glucose level is flatlining at 2.2. So this individual baby over the course of a day, and particularly over the course of a week, has very variable glucose levels. And I think what this highlights is that when you take a single blood glucose in a baby, it can be very misleading in respect of what the overall glucose control in these babies are. You take a blood glucose in the morning and you may have 2.2, and later in the afternoon it may be 6, or you may have one later on, 24 hours later, and it's above 10, or a long period where it's above 10. And this often goes clinically undetected. So in fact, after having done a pilot study in our neonatal unit where we used the CGMs in a few babies, we then went on to undertake a large international randomized controlled trial of nearly 400 babies, all of which were very low birth weight and during the first week of life. All the babies had masked CGM on, and what we found that there was a significant amount of clinically silent, both hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia. Looking at just the babies in the control arm of the study, we found that although the clinical data showed that only 2% of babies had an episode of hypoglycemia, defined as less than 2.6, when we looked at the CGM data, we found that 17% of the babies had periods of glucose less than 2.6 for more than an hour. And this shows that clinicians were unaware of potentially modifiable risk for long-term neurodevelopmental impairment, and that meant they lost the opportunity for intervention. Following that study, we then undertook a multi-centre trial using the real-time CGM to explore whether using real-time CGM could actually improve our ability to target glucose control. And we recruited 200 babies from 17 units in the UK and Europe. We recruited the infants that we considered most at risk, i.e. those less than 1,200 grams and in the first week of life. We inserted the CGM sensors, which were linked to the receivers and gave the clinical team information. And it showed you information in terms of an absolute value, but also you could see the trend. And we advised the clinical team to check those values every hour in the same way that they would check and record for other vital signs every hour. Then look at that in the context of a guideline, which was simply a paper-based guideline giving you targets and advice depending on whether your glucose levels were falling, stable, or rising. And then use that to decide whether you needed to increase glucose intake or modify any insulin that babies were receiving. And what this study did, importantly, was empower the nurses to take control of glucose control and make the changes themselves without having to go through many channels of getting prescriptions changed by doctors. And the results were published a few years ago now, and what we showed was a 10% improvement of the time in target, 2.6 to 10, which is equivalent to 13 hours in the first week of life. The significant difference was predominantly related to a reduction in hyperglycemia, but 15% of the infants in the standard care group were exposed to at least one episode of a sensor glucose less than 2.6 for more than an hour, which is a significant exposure to hypoglycemia, compared to 6% of those in the intervention arm. So quite a significant reduction. We also undertook a health economic analysis, which showed the technology to be cost effective. This resulted in an NIHR highlight stating that CGM in preterm infants is better than standard of care, and we got lots of comments by colleagues and parent groups. And on our unit in CUH, we now use CGM as part of standard care in our very low birth weight infants. And our local neonatal network is keen to support us to be able to help other units across the region to also bring in CGM use on their units. But it is challenging in an environment where the CGMs are not licensed for use in this population. Also, we are very lucky in Cambridge that we have Roman Havorka, who is the godfather of closed loop CGM with people with diabetes. And he has taken the wealth of data that is provided by the continuous glucose monitors and linked it to computer algorithms and machine learning to be able to create closed loop systems whereby the sensors link to either a phone or a laptop and then give advice to a pump to deliver insulin automatically. And we've worked with him to design an algorithm specifically for our babies that will help guide insulin delivery in our extremely preterm babies. We understood this study called Closing the Loop, which linked the CGM data to the machine learning algorithm. It learned from the previous response to interventions in individual babies, which is critical in these preterm babies where their insulin sensitivity is very variable. And taking a cohort of babies over a 24-hour window, we used the algorithm to be able to optimize their glucose control. What the algorithm did was it used a value every 15 minutes with on this occasion, a research fellow checking that they were happy with the decision, although they didn't change any of the computer algorithm decisions. And they aimed to target the glucose control from 4 to 8, so a more normal range than you would normally see in an intensive care unit, but more in keeping with what would be considered physiological. And what we showed was a significant improvement, again, in the time in target. So during this period when we knew it was the first 48 to 72 hours of preterm baby's life, we managed to improve the control from a 26% in this target to a 91% time in target using the closed loop system. Of course, the wealth of data we get from CGM is not just beneficial for preterm babies. There's other babies in the neonatal period who are also at risk from dysglycemia. And we've used CGM in a number of babies, including babies with birth asphyxia, where we've highlighted significant clinically undetected hyper and hypoglycemia, particularly low blood sugars at the end of the first week of life, when clinicians feel that these babies are more metabolically stable, but actually have problems of low blood sugars. And also in our babies who have hyperinsulinism, where there is a real challenge because these babies drop from high to low very quickly. And we've used CGM in these babies as well, and published on that. So I think use in these settings is helping us better understand physiology and pathology, and to determine what might be the optimal targets for glucose control in different babies with different physiology, and what the impact of different interventions might be for those babies. So I think this does provide us a much better way of providing a personalised approach to care. But there are a number of challenges. We've had lots of challenges on this journey. The devices are not CE marked, so it's an off-license use. So this has created a huge barrier for trying to introduce this into clinical practice in a number of trusts. The design has also evolved very much with a commercial focus and aim to make the insertion easier for the general public. So the simple design that you can see here with a sensor that is inserted at 90 degrees is quite challenging for us in a neonatal unit because babies don't have that depth of subcutaneous tissue. So we have to take it off the inserter device that you can see here, insert it by hand, parallel to the skin. Not a challenge in a neonatal unit with clinically competent people, but it's not using it within the recommendations of the device. So it's an off-label use and an off-label insertion method. And also the companies are increasingly moving to a combination device that looks like this, where the sensor and the transmitter are combined together, and we won't be able to take the sensor apart from the inserter. And this is great because it has hidden needles for adults and children where you don't want them to see the needles, but it increases the challenges for us to use them in the neonatal population.
You have 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. So it's taken 20 years for CGM to be accepted as a standard of care in glucose monitoring for patients with diabetes. And I'm hoping it will take less than 20 years for us to get a similar device for neonates, because I want us to be able to understand how we should best use them. But along with using devices off license, it's really important that we engage with commercial companies to make sure we explore new technologies for glucose sensing and product design to allow them to be more accessible to newborns. And that's what we're in the process of doing. I wanted to quickly also just comment on the specific uses, so vital sign monitoring and how that is important in enhancing positive touch for babies. So similar to the work that Don is involved in, we're involved in looking at different vital sign monitoring because there's a lot of evidence that increasing positive physical contact improves a baby's physiological stability, reduces maternal stress, and increases breastfeeding rates. And that in its own way can reduce length of stay. So the first few months are a critical developmental period where this physical contact impacts on neurodevelopment and bonding with parents. So we've had 2 projects that are currently exploring alternative monitoring technologies. The first is a wireless system for use in the neonatal intensive care unit, not in delivery unit, but in intensive care itself. This evolved from a parent request to design something to remove wires that tied their child to the cot. Started as a PhD project and a collaboration with engineering, but has subsequently had NIHR funding to develop the wireless system. It uses bespoke sensors that are connected to 2 separate transmitters that lie by the cot side, and these transmitters connect to a hub that sits next to the baby that then links to the monitors within the unit. The journey in system development has required experienced medical device engineers who understand all the regulations, but are working closely with us as academic leads. It's a complex system to develop and has required a large multidisciplinary team, including hardware and software development. But all of this has to be done within ISO 13485 manufacturing standards, which are not typically found in academic institutions. We've also been exploring not just removing the wires, but removing the sensors that contact the skin and extending the ability of monitors to look at monitoring movements. And the engineering department in Cambridge have specific expertise in machine learning, and they've been exploring image analysis in the assessment of pose recognition. So here we have a camera above the cot space, which is looking down at the baby and monitoring movement. And this combines image acquisition with machine learning to develop a tool that can help support intelligent monitoring to provide an early warning of changes in health. This just shows you some of the challenges, because babies don't lie in normal positions. They get covered with blankets. They lie in one different orientation or another. And sometimes there is phototherapy, or sometimes they're covered. So it's quite a challenge, but I think it has a quite exciting potential for the future of these babies. All these projects, of course, required a huge collaborative effort, and that's been critical to the journey, clinical and academic across departments of paediatrics and engineering, but also involving commercial companies as subcontractors, because they have the wealth and breadth of experience and skills to be able to support this development. And that's both in terms of mechanical engineering, software engineering, and also the design with the idea of manufacturing in the long term. Alongside the system design and medtech development, it's not just about creating the device, but also understanding the regulatory environment, supporting clinical trials, understanding health economics and the route to market. And this slide really represents some of those key partners who we have continuing to advise us in the project as we move forward. Developing medtech is a long and iterative process that starts potentially with a clinical or academic concept, but it takes a lot of commitment and funding to make that full journey. So there is need to have a clear sight on the business case, including understanding the intricacies of securing IP to ensure continued funding and delivery of a product to patients as part of a sustainable business case, with costs of manufacturing to scale, assessing procurement pathways, and managing sales into the NHS and beyond. And this isn't really about lining the pockets of commercial sector, but it's about making innovations in care actually available to our patients now and to help drive research for the future. So bringing medtech to market needs strong collaborations between health and commercial sector. And as clinicians, we're key, I think, in identifying the problems, the clinical need, and we're good at asking questions. Could we do this better? Why do babies have low glucose levels? Does it matter? How could we do it better? The industry has to have clearly defined solution. They want answers. Who is this for? Who is it going to help? How exactly are you going to solve the problem? What is the market potential, and what's the risk for us in investing? And as paediatricians and as neonatologists, I think we're really well placed to act as advocates for our patients, to demonstrate the clinical need so that the commercial sector knows there's a problem, knows there's a clinical need, but also important in de-risking, because that's what industry wants to know. We de-risk the potential solution for our patients, as that will encourage companies to be interested in developing technology for what we think is important and for our high-risk patients, or what the commercial team think is a high-risk patient. So I think we have a really important role in being advocates and working in that field. So thank you for listening to my journey, and that long journey that it is, as Don said, in developing medtech. But I also need to thank the families and staff on the units that have helped us in this journey too. And like Don, if there's anyone that's interested in learning more about what we're doing in Cambridge, we're always very keen to have people come and see what we're doing and share in that journey with us. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Catherine. So now we are heading to our last presentation. Giuseppe.
Here we are. Thank you so much for this kind invitation. And my short talk will deal with the wearable system in neonatal care. I will try to present some challenges and perspectives. And I'm really glad to have seen the previous presentation, because we sure do not match each other before, but I think that maybe in the future we can absolutely meet. So first of all, what are wearable systems? Wearable system, or the term wearable technology, indicates a wide variety of devices that are developed to be worn and accessible by the users and placed around our body, from the foot up to the top of the head, which have some main features. The first one is that they are always on, or better, mostly always on, and accessible by the users in terms of having actions or receiving feedback. So in a certain sense, they have to be controllable and also interactive, because they are dedicated to several functions that are for measuring things, or even to report communication or some inputs to the user itself. Actually, they include pieces of technologies that are capable to augment the senses and the processing function capability of the users. And but in this process, they have to be, we say, non-intrusive. It means they have to work in synergy with the body and with the human and its function. So not limiting, but also to be transparent for them in most of the occasions. So this technology is one of the technology that is characterizing our decades. A very famous paper, journal, which is Forbes, indicates that the decades 2020, 2030 as the decade of wearable technology, like the previous decade was the mobile one, and so on. And the next one maybe will be the artificial intelligence or embeddable technology one. If we want to give a look inside of wearable system, from the etymological point of view, we can describe them as technology that is to be worn onto the body. So they have to be placed onto the body with several methods, or embedded into our garments, or worn like accessories. From the technological point of view, they could be defined as interlinked measurement system, because most of them include sensor, and they are connected through a Bluetooth or wireless connection to an host or an application that is capable to show the data and the parameters that are computed from this kind of sensors. Their main application lies into three main fields. First of all, they started with sports, because they are important assistants to the performance. So they are capable to measure some functions and translate them into parameters in order to indicate the performance of the users. Also in work or ergonomics, they are irrelevant, because they can detect some, let's say, painful situation. And so they have to be assistance for our health, safety, and performance at the workplace. But the main application is surely for health, because they allow us to introduce important parameters that could be used for diagnosis, cure, rehabilitation, and even for prevention. In the healthcare system, or in the healthcare technology, the wearable health system could be, let's say, defined as body-worn platform, offering privacy solution for continuous health status monitoring. Mainly through non-invasive biomedical, biochemical, and physical measurement, but in some cases, like the infusion of the insulin pumps, could be seen also as a wearable system that provide also a mechanical infusion actions. So wearable biomedical systems are an ideal platform in order to enable the monitoring of patients over extensive periods of time. And so they are providing a large amount of data that have to be analyzed properly by proper algorithm and big data approach. Of course, they offer the opportunity in order to measure people everywhere, anytime, and for any kind of application, which is more or less the future of healthcare. We can define four main functions for wearable biomedical system. The first one is to empower functions of the humans. The second is to monitoring function of the human and also of the surrounding environments where he or she is acting. They can be, let's say, systems that can perform therapeutic actions, but also in some cases, they could even replace some human function. It is the case of the prosthesis, which is the last of the four different typologies of wearable biomedical systems. The other three are the sensorized garments, the body-worn accessories, or even exoskeletons. Textile research, talking about sensorized garments, we can say that textile research in the last 10 years has produced ultra-technical fibers, ultra-technical fabrics that are capable of conductivity, optical, let's say, transmission, can embed even nano capsule that could be charged with chemical principles to be released onto the skin of the users. And so these ultra-technical fabrics has several properties in terms of electrical, for sensing, for having actuating functions, and even chemical or biological activities. In the figure, you see the most important signals that are related and the positioning along of the human body, where this textile sensor could be placed in order to monitor, let's say, some signals. In the right side of the slide, you can see, for instance, a smart garment that we have developed for teenagers and for children in order to measure their physical activity and their electrocardiogram with a sensorized garment. You see, let's say, the quality of the textiles electrodes that could provide a real clinical quality signal. Indeed, the other two categories are prostheses that could be seen as wearable solution in order to replace not only an anatomical part, but also lost human functions for the mobility, but not only, but also exoskeletons that are now approaching also to the rehabilitation, as in the hand rehabilitation or even in the total body rehabilitation. And currently in our scientific institutes, Eugenio Medea in Bosisio Parini, which is close to Lecco, a very nice city in the northern area of Milan. We are experiencing the capability of an exoskeleton in rehabilitation and supporting cerebral palsy children. Actually, what are the main aspects or the main positive features that wearable system could bring to neonatal care? First of all is the integration of the concept of care, which is the clinical approach that is dedicated to take let's say, in consideration also the quality of the life of the mothers, of the children, and also of the clinical personnel, in order to assure the baby physical and comfortable experience that could guarantee the best condition for the most proper neuromotor development. In this sense, we say that wearable system could be used in order to reduce the technicality and to increase the care of people by the integration of the three main aspects of the development challenges in the development of innovative solution. It means taking in consideration the human in terms of the human requirements, and also anthropometry, and also the physiological and biological aspects, the technology and the design as the three main actors that have to be properly balanced in the development of this kind of solution. I will try to discuss this into three main applications that we have developed in our experience. This is one of the first experience that we had, which is the development of a sensorized body for the preterm infant or even the newborns in the first 2 hours of lives. The target was to improve comfort, protection, physical and psychological well-being of the newborn and of the mothers by replacing the standard daily adhesive electrodes and embedding in the garment the textile silver-based electrodes that are capable to maintain the clinical quality of the signal, and they could also interface directly with the monitors of the hospitals. Being a garment, also they could increase the thermal and physical protection of the newborns by maintaining the continuous monitoring. So We are passing from a configuration like on the left, in the configuration of the body, that also a containment sac in order to keep the baby well protected, like in the maternal belly. This system was patented by Polytechnic of Milan and the hospital and the Lecco Hospital, and we also dedicated the development of a randomized controlled trial for the evaluation of the compliance of mother and hospital staffs to wearable monitoring system of the newborns in the first few hours of life. The situation was described like in the figure. So we are in the delivery room, and after birth, the baby is worn with the wearable device that has also a small devices that Bluetooth transmits the ECG signals and the accelerometry signals, the triaxial accelerometry signals for the movements, through a Bluetooth access point that is capable to transform these signals into the Wi-Fi nectar and transfer them into the neonatal control room of the same hospital. This clinical study was aiming to assess the compliance of the hospital personnel. We had the opportunity to monitor and to receive the answer from 15 nurses of the hospital, the compliance of the mother and other relatives, usually the fathers, and the reliability of this monitoring system in the first 4 hours of life during the bonding procedure into an hospital. So this was an innovative solution that was available for monitoring heart rate, breathing rate, and also movements of the newborn, thanks to a sensorized body. Some points in order to describe the outcomes from this experimentation. From the reliability point of view, the wearable biomedical sensors provide excellent results, but we will discuss in the next few slides. What is more important here is to discuss about the user compliance and the nurse and midwives compliance. First of all, the users, the acceptance was really high because they felt that the situation and the solution as a normal, let's say, body or a normal garment with improved features. So and it was completely very usable because the situation was like in the normal situation and not just like let's say the standard procedures by placing electrodes and so on. And so it has also high expectation from the introduction of such a system in the hospital practice. Also, nurses and midwives accepted this system very well. Well, they started with a certain degree of skepticism because, let's say, of course, it's something new that is, let's say, introducing into the normal clinical practice. But after a few trials with the new system and also the realization of the possibility of this new kind of technology and those solutions, they soon turn into an acceptance rate. So for all the actors, it was a very good or excellent sensor ergonomics and wearability. Software usability was rated as very good, and also the perceived quality of the wearable monitoring systems as a whole was assessed with excellent average rate. So in relation to the comfort and compliance, we obtained very promising results. Here you can see, for instance, maybe it's not so visible, a track recorded from a neonates and the solution that we have developed. It is a sensorized body, which has also the possibility to embed directly a proprietary, let's say, monitoring device, or in this kind of situation, could be directly on the right side, could be directly attached to the monitor of the hospital. From the figures, you can see how the recorded ECG signal is excellent in quality, so allowing a perfect computation of the bit-to-bit heart rate, which is the clinical, let's say, request from the clinicians. For evaluating the performance in terms of technical availability or reliability, we developed a performance index, which is, let's say, a sort of percentage of useful signal with respect to the overall duration of the monitoring, according to a request of our, let's say, neonatologist. As you can see, there are some events that are, let's say, that shows a corruption of the signal. In these cases, in the upper part of the figure, some motion artifacts could be visible when the neonates move himself or herself. Of course, there is a small detachment of the textile electrodes from the skin, and so there are some very few moments in which the signal is corrupted. Indeed, in some cases, due to the intervention of the nurses, of the midwives, or even to the movements of the, let's say, of the neonates, of the newborn, there could be a signal interaction caused by the posting of the snap buttons that are directly connecting the sensorized garments to the monitor. In any case, in the 19 monitoring that we carried out, we obtained a very good average percentage of good quality signal, which is more or less 76%. And this value is also indeed increasing up to 85% or even to 90% in case of the inclusion of the signal with duration then less than 10 seconds, so signals that are not generating an alarm, and so therefore clinicians don't consider them, but also including the signal portion in which the events are of a long duration, so more than 1 minute, more than 60 seconds. This will require the intervention of the clinical personnel due to the alarm elicitation, and so this could be even included. Actually, this is one of the first randomized clinical trial with a sensorized garment in the clinical practice in neonatal care. What are the current solutions that are available onto the market? As also my previous presenter asked, these are two systems that are currently available in order to monitor the heart rate and the blood oxygenation. It is one, let's say, system that is placed in a socks, in a sensorized socks, or even a smart ring that is available in this kind of situation. These are medically certified devices that could be used into the clinical practice. Indeed, we are also working in some, let's say, other issues or other challenges related to the preterms or the elicitation of what are the risk factors during pregnancy. So monitoring mother and fetus. The situation is this one. When we have a maternal ECG, which has a good amplitude, 1 millivolt peak to peak, and at about 70 beats per minute frequency. While we have a fetal ECG that has a lower amplitude and a higher frequency. So by developing properly a proper, let's say, garment, is possible also to retrieve this signal. We experienced the design of such a sensorized garments in which we have 8 ECG channels, because the baby can move into the mother's belly, in order to identify what is the best solution in terms of, let's say, capability of detecting all the situation for the baby. And this was revealed the best design, because through this design, all these directions have been covered by the position of let's say, of the electrocardiogram leads. And this is the realization of the 8-channel HG Bluetooth device and the complete, let's say, sensorized garment that have been experienced. Of course, there is also open technological challenges, for instance, the algorithm optimization, because the recording signal is more or less this, and we need to automatically extract in order to let the clinician to have immediately available the important information. The detection, we have to remove the detection of the maternal QRS from one channel in order to obtain the final, let's say, ECG track in which it's possible to extract the fetal ECG, and then to compute through the detection of the fetal QRS, the fetal heart rate variability, which is so relevant in clinical practice. Actually, we are moving into the, let's say, development of this kind of solution towards to the markets, also thanks to the interest of the design department of my faculty. And this is one of the last projects of the students in which there was it was developed a sensorized patch with a dedicated devices that could be placed and adapted to the shape of the belly of each let's say user, in order to have also this kind of monitoring. Arriving to the last two slides, or better, this one slides. What is the main challenge? The main challenge is to let's say to follow a design-driven approach, and not only a technology-driven approach, which is so, let's say, often adopted by medtech developers. So in this kind of approach, we need to integrate technology in a vision related to the function and to the aesthetics. In this case, we developed this kind of methodology so that starting from each point of entrance or door, the function, the technology, or the aesthetics, we can really define all the elements that such a device could really have. Secondly, let's say we can say that thanks to the development of technology, now wearable systems are now approaching to a new maturity level. Of course, their application and exploitation, in particular in neonatal care, is still at the beginning, because there is a very, let's say, strict regulatory framework, in particular in Europe, thanks to the Medical Device Regulation 745 issued in 2017 and entered into force 2 years ago in May 2022. But even in this regulatory framework, we can say that the seamless monitoring is the most promising application in neonatal care for this kind of technologies, and in particular the smart garments one. Of course, the clinical validation and certification represent the most relevant barrier to the introduction into neonatal care, because it requires the participation of not only clinicians, but also of the companies at a new level and with a certain effort. And sometimes also let's say the economic barrier for the introduction of this kind of technologies is really relevant. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope to have provided to you a small insights of what could be the perspectives of this kind of wearable systems.
Thank you, Giuseppe. And now we have still a few minutes for the questions. Anyone? If not, maybe I have one question. This is for all of you, I guess, because you mentioned that the implementation of a medical device on the market can take up to 15 years. And in your opinion, what is the main bottleneck in this process, and what could be done to speed up?
I don't mind talking about that. I did mention it in my talk. I think there are lots of reasons. The journey is a long one, and for me, one of the key parts is as I mentioned in those technology steps that you take. Each of them almost requires separate funding streams in order to address them at different stages. And certainly in the UK, that's how our funding bodies are geared up. They will provisionally give you some money for for developing perhaps your concept, and then you then go back to them. You've got your concept, and then it's like, okay, what to do in the first patient trials, and you get your bit of funding for that. And then how do you make it into a product that can be manufactured at scale? You do that, and then there's a big clinical trial to show that it's effective. And all of those stages, and when you're applying for funding, there's a 6-month application process, there's a 6-month evaluation process by the funders. You then get your money and you've got to set up the team. So you're talking 18 months again before you're on to the next step. And all of those hurdles are problematic, and something that could smooth things through on the whole journey, that demonstrates that there's something in your idea, that your concept works. The patient trials have shown that evidence. Something that can smooth those would be great. And I think industry has a part to play there, particularly as many of the big medtech companies have huge R&D funds that can support this. They often build it into their own systems to advance their own systems, but if they can take good ideas at the beginning, they could help fund that all the way through. And only partnering with dedicated translationists, engineers, and scientists, I think, will we ever get there.
I iterate that, and it has huge delays, both in terms of making you commercially able to move things forward, but also in terms of resource of staff. So you're trying to employ someone to develop a product, then you've got people's salaries you're trying to keep, and people employed in that post who are engaged know all about that bit of tech. There's no automatic, there's no joined up way of funding that person to stay within that project in a cohesive and long-term plan. And even within academia, you will be penalized because they do not, as Don said, have any truck with the fact that you haven't published for 10 years. So if you haven't published for 10 years, then you're obviously not doing anything. So you can't get PhDs and postdocs to work within the system very well, because actually they can't publish anything, because actually you often don't want them to publish very much until you're much further down the track. So I think the whole funding setup at the moment, particularly in the UK, I think, which is our experience, is quite challenging in terms of the length of time it takes to develop medtech.
From my point of view, I think that 15 years could be even a too long period. I mean, I think that much of the catalyst that could shorten this time are users. If there is a real strong user needs, maybe the application could be shorter. And even by the spreading of different experience, because as I have shown to you, we are working hard on the textile components. And so we are also, let's say, developing certification like sensorized system of class 1, because they are passive, and so electrode system that could be really easy integrated into the clinical practice by the fact that they have to be just matched with the standard monitoring devices. Of course, this, in any case, it's a change of paradigm, in particular for the textile companies that having fashion in mind, have other things into their minds. And so the number are not the one that they envisage in order to have a mass production of devices for protect newborns from premature babies, but also for money. But if we're talking into the monitoring of people in the first 2 hours of life, maybe this could be the real, let's say, driver, because at least in Italy we have more or less 400,000 births per year, and so maybe submitting all the countries, we have a very, very huge amount of devices. So in any case, user needs are the real factors that can drive the difference between the introduction into the market, and so also producing also, let's say, a sort of new vision from the regulatory point of view.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
I think just to add to Giuseppe, I think it's a good point that the class of the device is really important. So Giuseppe gave an example of an ECG. An ECG is relatively simple to put through the regulatory steps, because you can almost do it in a lab, as long as you can demonstrate that you can pick things up to the same standard. Once you start to add in other components, so whether things like Kathy's doing, where you're looking at movements and categorizing those, then what is your gold standard to compare against? The so-called predicate device is much more challenging. Or the one example that I used around what in effect we're using are reflectance mode pulse oximeters, of which there are no real licenses for premature infants, for example, in anywhere around the world, for reflectance mode, in the same way that you might get a transmission mode pulse oximeter. So how do you align that with the current predicate devices is quite challenging. And then you have to venture off into much more complex investigational studies that do add length to the regulatory steps that you follow. There's also challenges as well with getting a regulatory body. I mean, they're hard to come by now in Europe, and finding someone who can turn your device and your data around into a regulatory application and approval in a very short period of time is really quite challenging, and often that again could take years in order to get that through. So there is a lack of that regulatory bodies out there with that expertise to try.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for all fantastic presentations. And thank you all for participating in this 7th webinar. And please remember that our next webinar will be on digital technologies for children and young adults, and will take place online on 5th November 2024.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you to all.
Thank you for joining us. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.